The digital dashboard of Meredith's SUV flickered once before the engine died, leaving her stranded in the middle of a roaring Naperville intersection. As the horns of frustrated drivers swelled into a deafening chorus, she reached for the door handle, only to hear a series of rapid, metallic clicks. The locks were frozen. On the central console, a single line of glowing white text appeared. Remote Access Active. System locked by primary administrator. Through the reinforced glass, she watched a silver coupe pull calmly to the curb, and her husband stepped out, checking his watch with the chilling composure of a man who had timed this exact moment of terror. Inside their pristine mansion later that night, the silence was even louder. While Meredith brushed her hair, a stray glint of light caught her eye from the shelf. A pinhole lens hidden in the lace of a porcelain figurine. She turned slowly, scanning the room. Realizing the smoke detector, the picture frames, and even the vents were staring back at her. The house wasn't a sanctuary. It was a curated cage, and the man sleeping soundly in the next room had been documenting every breath she took to ensure she would never take another one in freedom. The kitchen clock ticked like a metronome, set to the rhythm of Meredith's mornings, each second a reminder that delay was a flaw, and flaws had no place in the Collins' house. She traced a finger along the counter's edge, checking for dust. None. Of course not. The maid had come yesterday, and Meredith had inspected her work before the woman even left, watching as she folded the dish towels into perfect rectangles, counting the silverware drawers to ensure every fork lay parallel to its neighbor. Sun streamed through the tall, arched windows of the Naperville mansion, illuminating the crystalline perfection of the breakfast table. Meredith adjusted a silver spoon by a fraction of a millimeter, ensuring it aligned perfectly with the edge of the hand-pressed linen runner. The air smelled of expensive Arabica and the lemon-scented wax used to polish the mahogany furniture. She smoothed the front of her charcoal blazer, checking her reflection in the polished surface of the toaster. Her dark hair remained trapped in a low, tight bun, not a single strand daring to defy the structural integrity of the style. This was the life of the wife of Circuit Judge Arthur Collins. A series of curated moments, a gallery of silence and stillness. Outside, the lawn was a sea of emerald, each blade of grass seemingly manicured to the same height. The heavy tread of footsteps on the stairs signaled Arthur's arrival. Meredith did not turn. She simply reached for the porcelain carafe. Arthur moved into the room with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who owned the air he breathed. He didn't speak immediately. He stood behind her, his presence a cold front moving into the kitchen. He reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric of her shoulder, searching for a stray thread or a speck of lint that didn't exist. "The lipstick, Meredith," he said, his voice a low, melodic baritone that carried the weight of a judicial sentence. "It's aggressive. A bit frantic, wouldn't you say?" Meredith felt the familiar tightening in her chest. "I thought it suited the occasion. The library board meeting? It suits a woman who wants to be noticed for the wrong reasons." He stepped around her and sat at the head of the table. He didn't look at the breakfast she had prepared. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and produced a small, silver-handled pair of scissors. With a clinical precision that made Meredith's stomach turn, he laid her primary credit card on the white tablecloth and snipped it in two. The plastic gave a sharp, final crack. "There have been irregularities," Arthur murmured, stirring his coffee without making a sound against the porcelain. "Small leaks in the family vessel. I've decided to centralize the accounts. For your protection, of course. The world is full of predatory influences, Meredith. You're far too soft to navigate them alone." Meredith stared at the bifurcated card. It looked like a broken wing. She wanted to reach out, to protest, but her hands remained frozen at her sides. She felt the cold sweat prickling her spine, a silent rebellion her body waged while her mind remained a prisoner of the domestic order. The drive to the Naperville Public Library was a blur of suburban perfection. Oak trees lined the streets, their leaves turning a deep, bruised gold in the autumn light. Meredith checked her rearview mirror out of habit, a tic she had developed over the last month. A black sedan with windows so dark they looked like voids sat 3 cars back. It followed her through the winding residential streets, maintaining a constant, haunting distance. When she pulled into the library staff lot, the sedan glided to a stop at the curb across the street. It didn't park. It simply hovered, the engine idling with a low, predatory hum. Meredith hurried up the marble steps of the neoclassical building, the scent of old paper and floor wax rising to meet her like a sanctuary that no longer offered safety. Inside, she went through the motions of cataloging. She moved books from the return bin to the carts, her fingers trembling as she scanned barcodes. Every few minutes, her gaze drifted to the tall windows overlooking the plaza. The sedan was still there, a thin wisp of blue exhaust curled from its tailpipe. The driver remained a silhouette, a shadow within a shadow. Suddenly, the car's high beams flashed. 2 sharp, blinding bursts of light that felt like a physical strike against her chest. It was a signal, a reminder. I see you. By noon, the walls of the library felt like they were leaning inward. Meredith needed to leave. To prove to herself she could still occupy the world. She walked to the small cafe on the corner, a place where the baristas knew her order. "Just the turkey club and a tea, please," she said, her voice sounding thin and brittle to her own ears. The young man behind the counter smiled and swiped her backup card. The terminal emitted a harsh, discordant beep. He tried again. The same rejection. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins," the boy said, his face flushing with the awkwardness of the moment. "It says the account is restricted. There's a note here. Something about a judicial hold." The silence in the cafe became a physical weight. Meredith could feel the eyes of the other patrons, the local lawyers, the stay-at-home mothers, the gossips who fueled the town's social engine. They were watching the judge's wife crumble over a $10 sandwich. I must have grabbed the wrong one," she lied, her face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a fever. She backed away from the counter, her purse clutched to her chest like a shield. She fled the cafe, the bell on the door ringing behind her like a funeral knell. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long, distorted shadows across Washington Street as she drove back toward the house. She reached the busiest intersection in the city, the light turning a stubborn red. Meredith waited, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned the color of bone. Suddenly, the dashboard of her luxury SUV flickered and went dark. The hum of the engine vanished, replaced by a terrifying silence. She pressed the ignition button, but nothing happened. Behind her, a chorus of horns erupted, angry, insistent blares that echoed off the brick buildings. "Come on," she whispered, her breath hitching. "Come on, please." She reached for the door handle, intending to wave for help, but the latch wouldn't budge. The electronic locks engaged with a series of rapid, metallic clicks. She was sealed in. On the central console, a message appeared in glowing white text. "Remote Access Active. System locked by primary administrator." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She hammered her fists against the reinforced glass of the side window, but the triplex material didn't even vibrate. Outside, the world continued in a muffled, frantic pantomime. Drivers gestured obscenely. A police officer on a motorcycle began to weave through the stalled traffic toward her. She was a specimen in a jar, a goldfish in a bowl of steel and glass. Then, through the windshield, she saw him. Arthur's silver coupe pulled up onto the shoulder of the road. He stepped out, looking every bit the concerned husband. He walked toward her car with a calm, measured pace, ignoring the chaos of the traffic. He tapped a code into his smartphone, and the driver's side door of Meredith's car swung open with a hiss of pneumatic pressure. "Meredith," he said, reaching in to take her hand. His touch was dry and firm. "You've had another episode. The battery, darling. You must have left the lights on again. Or perhaps you simply forgot how the ignition sequence works in your current state." "The doors were locked, Arthur," she gasped, her voice cracking. The screen said what your tired mind wanted it to say." He leaned in, his scent, sandalwood and cold iron, filling the cabin. "Look at these people, Meredith. Look at the scene you've caused. They're staring because they're worried. They see a woman who has lost her grip." He led her to his car, his arm wrapped around her waist in a gesture that looked like support but felt like a restraint. As he drove her home, he spoke in a low, hypnotic drone about the dangers of overwork, about the fragility of the female psyche, about the specialists he had been consulting. By the time they reached the iron gates of the estate, Meredith found herself staring at her own hands, wondering if they truly belonged to a woman who was losing her mind. That night, the house felt different. The shadows in the corners of the bedroom seemed to have eyes. Meredith sat at her vanity, pulling a brush through her hair with mechanical strokes. She caught a glint of light in the mirror, not from her own eyes, but from the shelf behind her. She stood up and walked toward a small porcelain figurine of a shepherdess, a wedding gift from Arthur's mother. She leaned in close. There, nestled in the intricate lace of the figurine's painted collar, was a tiny glass lens, a pinhole camera. She spun around, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at the smoke detector, the edge of a picture frame, the vents. They were everywhere. The house wasn't a home, it was a laboratory, and she was the subject under the microscope. Arthur wasn't just watching her. He was recording her, documenting her life to build a case against her existence. She waited until the rhythmic, heavy breathing of Arthur's sleep echoed from the master suite. She crept down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold oak floor. She reached the door to his study, the inner sanctum where the air always felt 5 degrees colder. She held a set of duplicate keys she had spent months secretly molding from wax impressions. The lock turned with a dry, skeletal click. Inside, the room smelled of stale tobacco and the metallic tang of old law books. She bypassed the desk and went straight to the large landscape painting on the far wall. She swung it aside to reveal the safe. The code, his birthday, followed by the date of his appointment to the bench, worked on the 3rd try. The heavy door swung open. Inside were rows of black binders, each meticulously labeled. She pulled the one with her name on it. Inside was a flash drive and a stack of medical documents. She retreated to the desk, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the mahogany to stay upright. She plugged the drive into a laptop and put on the headphones. The sound that filled her ears was her own voice. But it was wrong. It was a montage of her screaming, her crying, her sounding incoherent and hysterical. She listened closely. Arthur had edited the tapes. He had removed his own calm, prodding insults, the psychological needles he used to prick her until she bled, leaving only her reactions. To anyone listening, she sounded like a woman in the throes of a psychotic break. Beneath the drive, lay a document on the letterhead of Dr. White, their family physician. Diagnosis: progressive paranoid schizophrenia with cognitive decline. The words blurred. She remembered the vitamin shots White had given her, the routine checkups where he asked leading questions about her memory. It was a conspiracy of the elite. Arthur had bought a diagnosis. She flipped the page and found the proof: a series of wire transfer receipts to an offshore account in Dr. White's name, totaling nearly $200,000. The dates matched her appointments with surgical precision. Meredith, the voice was a whip crack in the silence. She froze, the headphones still clamped over her ears, the blue light of the laptop illuminating the evidence of her own destruction. Arthur stood in the doorway. He hadn't bothered with a robe. He stood in his silk pajamas, his posture as straight as a tombstone. "You were always so curious," he said, walking into the room. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, the way a scientist might look at a ruined culture in a petri dish. "It's a symptom, you know. The need to find patterns where none exist. The obsession with secrets." He reached out and closed the laptop. The room plunged into near darkness, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. "I've made the arrangements," he whispered, his hand coming up to stroke her cheek. His skin felt like parchment. 3 days. A facility called Quiet Haven. It's very exclusive. You'll have a view of the woods. No more libraries, no more stress. Just peace. "You bought him," she hissed, her voice finding a jagged edge she didn't know it possessed. "You paid White to lie." Arthur smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "I paid for a consensus, Meredith. And in this town, my consensus is the law. Who will they believe? The judge who sits in robes of state, or the woman who can't even drive through a green light without a breakdown?" He took the keys from her limp hand and led her back to the bedroom. He didn't lock the door, but he didn't have to. The house was now a fortress. The next 48 hours were a slow-motion descent into a waking nightmare. Meredith tried to leave the next morning, but the front door was flanked by 2 men in dark suits. Private security Arthur had hired under the guise of medical escorts. "For your safety, Mrs. Collins," one of them said, his eyes hidden behind mirrored shades. She tried the phone. Dead. The internet. Blocked. Even the maid, a woman Meredith had known for years, looked away when Meredith tried to catch her eye. Arthur had poisoned the well. He had spent the day making calls, his voice drifting through the house as he told their friends, their neighbors, the children's teachers, that Meredith was stepping away for a while to deal with a nervous exhaustion. She found herself in the kitchen, cornered by a woman in a gray suit who introduced herself as Helena. "I'm here to assist with your transition, Meredith," Helena said. She had the flat, dead eyes of a shark. Meredith tried to push past her to get to the back door, but Helena moved with a speed that was purely professional. She blocked the exit, her hand resting on Meredith's shoulder with a grip that was just short of painful. "Let's not make this difficult," Helena murmured. "The judge wants this to be a dignified departure." Meredith retreated to the basement, the only place where the cameras didn't seem to reach. She sat on a cold laundry crate, her head in her hands. She felt the weight of the gold and stone mansion pressing down on her. She was being erased. But in the darkness of the laundry room, her hand brushed against something in the pocket of an old gardening apron. A small plastic rectangle, a secondary flash drive she had used for library backups months ago. A spark of something, not hope, but a cold, hard spite, ignited in her chest. She spent the next few hours in a fever of activity. She knew the house's digital infrastructure, She had helped set up the library's cloud systems. She waited until Arthur was in the garden, showing the escorts the perimeter. She used the old laptop in the laundry room, an air-gapped machine Arthur had forgotten about, to compile the files she had managed to photograph with her mind and the few scraps of paper she'd hidden in her bra. She uploaded the files to a hidden cloud directory, a dead man's switch she had designed for the library's rare book collection. The day of the gala arrived. The annual library charity evening, the crown jewel of Naperville's social calendar. "You will wear the navy silk," Arthur said, standing in the doorway of her dressing room. He held a diamond necklace in his hand like a leash. "You will smile. You will thank the donors. And then we will drive straight to the facility. If you behave, the children will be allowed to visit you in a month. If you don't..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The limousine ride to the library was a study in terror. Arthur sat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb pressing into the pulse point of her wrist. "You're shaking, Meredith. It's the nerves. Don't worry. Tomorrow, the world goes away." As the car pulled up to the library, the red carpet was a gauntlet of flashing lights and false smiles. Arthur let her out, his hand clamped onto her elbow. He steered her through the crowd, nodding to the mayor, the police chief, the wealthy benefactors. "Doesn't she look lovely?" Arthur said to a group of reporters. "A bit tired, perhaps. We're taking a long holiday starting tomorrow." Much-needed rest. Meredith felt the scream building in her throat, but she kept it down. She saw Helena hovering in the periphery, a gray ghost in the sea of black ties and sequins. They were moved into a small holding room before the speeches were to begin. Arthur turned to her, his face darkening. "I know you have something, Meredith. I saw you in the laundry room." He grabbed her evening bag and dumped the contents on the floor. He found a small silver thumb drive, a decoy she had planted. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound, and crushed it under the heel of his polished shoe. "You really thought it would be that easy? You're a librarian, Meredith. You deal in fiction, I deal in reality." He grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging into the silk of her dress. "One word, one look that isn't perfect, and I will ensure you never see the sun again. Do you understand me?" Meredith nodded, her breath coming in short, jagged gasps. The gala began. The great hall of the library was transformed into a cathedral of light. Arthur was called to the stage to give the keynote address. He stood at the podium, the very picture of civic virtue. Meredith sat in the front row, Helena directly behind her. She waited for the moment Arthur began his practice speech about the importance of legacy and the sanctity of truth. She stood up. Helena reached for her, but Meredith had anticipated the move. She knocked over her champagne flute, the glass shattering and creating a momentary distraction. She bolted toward the side of the stage, toward the multimedia booth she had operated for a decade. "Meredith!" Arthur's voice boomed over the speakers, losing its practiced calm. She reached the console. The technician, a young man she had trained himself, looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Collins, what are you—" "Move, Billy," she said, her voice sounding like a bell. She bypassed the security protocols. She entered the cloud directory. She hit override. The giant screen behind Arthur, which had been displaying a slideshow of library history, suddenly flickered. The first image was the wire transfer to Dr. White. The hall went silent. 1,000 people froze, their glasses halfway to their lips. Then came the audio. Arthur's voice, distorted but unmistakable, filled the cathedral-like space. "I will erase you, Meredith. I will tell them you're crazy, and they will believe me because I am the law. You are nothing but a ghost in my house." Arthur turned, his face going from pale to a deep, bruised purple. He lunged for the console, but the crowd, the very people he had spent a lifetime courting, stood in his way. They weren't moving to help him. They were moving to see. Meredith stood her ground as Arthur reached the booth. He didn't care about the cameras anymore. He didn't care about the witnesses. He reached over the counter and grabbed her by the throat, his eyes wide with a feral, cornered rage. "I'll kill you," he screamed, his voice cracking. The flashes of the cameras were constant now, a strobe light effect that captured his downfall in high definition. 2 police officers, men Arthur had shared whiskey with just an hour before, pulled him off her. They didn't do it gently. The handcuffs clicked, a sound of absolute finality. Meredith slumped against the console, her hand going to the bruised skin of her neck. She watched as they led him out of his own temple, his shoes dragging on the marble floor he had helped pay for. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of her own breathing. She looked out at the faces in the hall, the shock, the pity, the dawning realization of the lie they had all lived in. She walked to the podium. She didn't look at the notes Arthur had left behind. She looked at the city of Naperville, and for the first time in 20 years, she spoke in her own voice. "The truth," she said, her voice echoing through the stacks of books, "is never as quiet as we want it to be." Months later, the library was quiet again. The scandal had faded into the town's dark history, a cautionary tale whispered in the cafes. Meredith sat in the children's wing, the sun warming her shoulders. She held a book open, her children huddled close to her. She wasn't checking the time. She wasn't looking for dust. She was simply reading, her voice steady and clear, the only sound in a world that was finally, beautifully, her own.